All right. Chapter 13, the Cal Perfect Strong Verb, page 138 in your grammar. So we've read this chapter ahead, and we've already had the excitement of it. We talked about of the almost 72,000 verbs in the Hebrew Bible, over 2/3 occur in the Cal stem. That's a good thing, isn't it? It's kind of nice till you get to the weak verbs, right? For this reason, significant attention will be given to the various forms of the Cal stem in the following chapters. Only after the Cal stem has been mastered will the derived stems be studied. In this grammar, memorization of paradigms will be kept to a minimum. Only in your study of the Cal stem will paradigm memorization be required. Once we move into the derived stems, no further paradigm memorization is required. Instead, you will learn a system of diagnostic indicators, whereby identification of the derived stems or conjugations are made possible without the burden of memorizing paradigm. The use of diagnostic indicators is an important and unique feature of this grammar. Well, I don't know how unique it is, but it is a good way to do it. All right, so the Cal stem. The Cal stem, as you remember from the last chapter, is the simple or basic verbal stem. Cal verbs are active in voice, but a few of them are passive. A few passives exist, but primarily the Cal stem is active. The Cal stem also exhibits a simple or unnuanced type of action. Remember that verbs in Hebrew are portraying a kind of action, not in and of themselves time. Right? Where does the time come from? Well, he talks about the time coming from the context and syntactical issues. Even the meaning of the verb can contribute to our decision as to what time is being referred to. It's not as hard as it sounds, maybe in the beginning, to figure that out. I mean, there are ambiguities sometimes, and there are times in which it's difficult, but overall, it's not as difficult as it might seem. All right. So an example of a verb in the Cal stem is katal, meaning he killed. Now, that's just not an example of a verb in the Cal stem. That's going to be our paradigm verb, right? So that's the verb that we are going to use to spell out paradigms, the endings, the other things that distinguish between the forms of the different verbs. So that verb, kof, take, lamed, is going to be our paradigm verb. All right, simple action of the Cal stem is further divided into transitive, intransitive, and stative. You know all about that? Cal verbs can be transitive, which means what? Okay, they're going to take an object. Cal verbs can be intransitive, which means what? They don't take an object. Or stative, they describe some quality or state of being. All right? All right, the perfect conjugation. The perfect conjugation is used to express a completed action or state of being. We've seen this phrasing before at the end of that paragraph. The perfect aspect. Now, what does he mean by aspect? That's a technical grammatical term he's using. The perfect aspect.
Completed? Does it have to do with completion?
Well, not the term aspect itself, because all of the tenses, if I call them that, will have aspect. What do you mean by aspect?
The type of action is parentheses.
Well, that's right. All right. So the term aspect refers to the type of action. So what? And if you use the word tense, tense by definition is a word that refers to time. Right? Past tense, present tense, future tense. So he's avoiding using the term tense. Of course, some grammars, some Hebrew grammars, especially older ones, are going to use tense. They're going to talk about the perfect tense. Well, he's going to talk about the perfect aspect here. And in a sense, it's a little bit more accurate because Hebrew verbs really don't have within themselves inherently a time reference. Right? So that's what he means when he says aspect. The perfect aspect denotes completed action, whether in the past, present, or future. So the perfect aspect, completed action. Imperfect aspect is going to be what? Incomplete aspect, or incomplete action. All right, now we're going to form our cal perfect verbs by adding endings to them and then fiddling with the vowel points, with the vocalization. All right? You know by now that when you start adding things to words, Hebrew words, there's a likelihood that you're going to be changing vocalizations, right? Because words change vocalization depending on how many syllables they have and just a combination of things, right? And that's what's going to happen with our strong verb. So what you really need to know are these endings. See them on the top of page 140 of your grammar? Okay. You really need to be able to spell these from memory, right, and understand their label. All right? Notice how we go. Third masculine singular. Why do we start with the third masculine singular? To this the lexical form. All right? So we start with the third masculine singular. Then we go with the third feminine singular. Then the second masculine singular. The second feminine singular. And then the first person, common singular. What does that mean? In the first person, it's not inflected for gender, or both genders share the same form, however you want to look at it. All right. Then in the plural, we have the third common plural, second masculine plural, second feminine plural, and first common plural. So you have to know how to set up the category that way. Right? So you kind of have to remember that. 3MS, 3FS, etc. Once you know that, then you can memorize the endings. Blank, ta, t, u, tem, ten, nu. Now those are not unlike the endings we've already seen, right? We've already seen pronominal suffixes, and they looked a lot like this, didn't they? Right? Which is good because we're not, trying to memorize something that's completely, totally different from what we've already seen. But I suppose it could cause a little bit of confusion too, because they're so similar. All right, so blank, ta, t, u, tem, ten, nu. Okay. Say that with me. Now you should be able to just say those. This is like o, ace, a, amaneta, usi, right? And you should be able to say them. Those are the endings for the present active indicative verbs in Greek. Great.
It's Greek to me.
It's Greek to you. Yes, it is to me too. So you should be able to just say these things. This is the kind of thing where if I call you up at 2 a.m, you really wouldn't even have to wake up. You just say, oh, blank, ta, t, u, ten, nu. All right, come on, good night. Correct. And in the morning you wouldn't even remember I called, because you wouldn't really even have to wake up. Right? Not only say it, but be able to spell them. All right? Now, when you have the tav has what in these endings? Dogish. Why does the tav have a dogish in it?
Because it doubles, it eliminates the top before it.
No.
Takes the place of.
No.
What's the question again?
Why does the tav have a dogish in it?
Just to indicate that that's not part of the word, like that. There was one of the A's that had that.
No, that's a motif.
One other thing you told us, the intensive and so on.
Okay, the PL has a dogish in the second root letter, but that's not this. What kind of letter is Tav? Okay, it's a Begad Kafat letter, right? Begad Kafat letters sometimes have dogish lanes in them. When does a Begad Kafat letter have a dogish lane in it?
The beginning.
Well, at the beginning of a word, when it is not
By a vowel.
preceded by a vowel. Okay? So when a Begad Kafat letter is not preceded by a vowel, it has a dogish lane. That's the case here. Okay? What do you have in these forms? It's a silent Shavah. Therefore, you have a dogish lane in the Tav. So remember, every one of the endings that starts with a Tav has a dogish lane in it. That's going to help us. Right?
So you're saying that all of
But it could be, grammatically, it still could be could be a dogish form.
When it's not preceded by a vowel, only by a shavah, right?
All right?
When it's not preceded by a vowel, only a shavah.
Now, when a Begad Kafat letter is not preceded by a vowel, then it gets a dogish lane in it. Well, there's a Shavah there, but it's a silent Shavah, so it really isn't a vowel. All right? So that's why it's getting, and that's going to help us. Now, here's the vocabulary form right here, and we need to remember that. That's typical, okay? Vocabulary form, comments, patak. Okay? Now, that's not going to be a problem because that's the vocabulary form. So we're going to know that. The vocabulary form typically will be the cow perfect 3ms form of the word, right? So the word to kill, that's the vocabulary form of the word to kill. And that is our paradigm verb, right? Like luo was in Greek. And it's kind of an appropriate one, isn't it, to kill. All right. Now, what are our endings here? All right. Let's see. Blank. Right? Blank. Ha. Right?
Are you going to put the other vowels up there for that last one?
Yep. T. Right? Okay. Now, hang on a minute.
Okay.
All right. Now, what vowel is under this? None. Okay. I'm forced to have a vowel under here because that's the ending, right?
Yes.
But so I have no vowel here.
So you have to have a dog.
I have no vowel here, so I'm going to have a silent Shavah in all of those forms.
And this basically because it's a marker.
Huh?
It's not a marker.
Well, yeah, because you can't have nothing under a consonant. I mean, you do have nothing under this consonant in the sense of a sound, but you got to mark that. We got to put a mark under there. You can't have a consonant without a mark under it. Generally, you could have a quiescent olive, right, which we'll see.
Yeah, another one of those.
Is that like unless, for example, the top one, final letter?
What I'm trying to show you is once you know these endings, you can figure out how to spell all these forms just by knowing the endings. By knowing this form and knowing the endings, right? So I put the endings down. I can't put Shavah under that because that has a vowel under it because of the ending. So just like this, the last consonant can have nothing under it. I don't have to have a Shavah there, but if I'm going to have something after it, then I got to hold that place with a Shavah, right? Which is what I'm doing here. Okay. So now what's going to be here? Well, here, instead of the Shavah being there, the Shavah goes here. So I get that kind of form. Here, I just carry down these vowels here, right? Right? Now the only thing I have to think about is accenting. Okay. The accent's not going to go on the Shavah syllable here. Accent's going to go on this last syllable here. I don't have to mark it because it's the last syllable, right? Here, where's the accent going to go? The accent's going to go there. Okay.
Why?
It just does. Because the accent,
Could go in the last part.
well, it could. It just doesn't. So in other words, it's going to try, if it can, it's going to match this original word right here. Okay? Now, it can't here match the original word because I'm not going to have an accent over no vowel sound. Right? So I can't, so that's going to be on the last syllable. But that there can match. Here it can match, but I don't have to mark it because that's the last syllable. Right? And here it can match, and it's not the last syllable, so I'm marking it. So once I know this, and I try to conform these as much as I can to this, where I can do it, then I know the spelling and the accenting. Okay? Now, these, we're breaking a cheval rule right here. Right? Because normally, I can't have a silent cheval at the end of a word. And normally, the first cheval is vocalized. But in this case, neither one of these chevals are vocalized.
How come in that one that you were just pointing at, those last three consonants are all part of the same syllable?
Yep. It's taught. Well, normally they don't have that. Normally, but we do here. Alright? They're taught. But you can have an LT sound, and that works. Alright?
Because both the silent and you only have one vowel. Okay.
Yes. Alright, now, now we did the singular, let's do the plural, right? Blank, ta, t, oo, ten, new. Alright? Now those are my endings. What am I going to do here? Well, I can't have a cheval here because I already have a vowel with that long. You see that? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to have this. Okay.
How come that would not? I mean, why does that have to go to a cheval under the top?
Here under the tape?
Or tape, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, in all these forms, I'm going to have a cheval.
You are. I mean, that's just a.
Yeah.
That's just
Just like here, I have a no vowel. In every form, I'm going to have a no vowel somewhere. Right? I mean, because if you put too many vowels in there, all of a sudden the word just becomes so full, it's difficult to manage. Right? So every one of these is going to have a no vowel. Right? Can I put a cheval here? Yeah. And so I can put yeah, and I can put a cheval there. And now the reason is now I have a really long word. I have a whole closed syllable here, right? And when I have a real long word, this is a tonic syllable, and I have the pre-tonic and then the pro-pre-tonic syllable, right? When I start having lots of syllables like that, I'm starting to want to reduce the vowels, right? Because if
that's going to be vocal and not silent.
right, it's the beginning of the word always has to be vocal.
Has to be vocal.
Right. But I don't want to, overdo, the vowels in that word, right? I mean, if I start putting too many vowels in that word, the word just becomes too heavy, too full of stuff, right? All right? And so, where am I going to accent at this point? Well, with this long of a word, the accent is everything I depend on those, right? The accent's over there. I can't accent this. Now check me, make sure I'm spelling this right. Am I spelling that right? Okay. Then same thing here, right? For the same reasons. I would expect the comments here, right? Because that's what I have here. But my word's getting so long, I'm wanting to reduce some vowels here, and that's why that's happening. Right? All right. And then here I have can have my Shabbat there because that new ending, that vowel goes with that new there. So now I can do my normal thing too. And my accent can go there this time. So
the accent's going on the last syllable, and those are just because of the length. Is that what you were saying?
I would think so, yeah. But I guess in a sense this has as many syllables, but it's not a closed syllable.
Right.
But anyway, however you want to figure it out, that's the way it is, right? So, I find myself being able to say, here are the endings, and I want to match this as much as I can, as much as the endings will allow me to. I want to match this, and using those principles, I find myself being able to derive the spelling of the paradigm.
Now the book shows methag on.
Yeah, I didn't put the metags on there,
But
and
you
that's
didn't.
well, I just left them off. I mean, it was just an oversight on my part.
In class,
Huh?
the teacher said you really can't distinguish the sound difference. You can't.
Your other teacher said that? Yeah. But that's to show that that's a closed, unaccented syllable. So you would expect a comet ketuf. But that's not a comet ketuf, it's a regular comet. So technically we should have a metag there to indicate that. All right, so
On third female singular and third plural.
and now that's not a closed syllable, so that's obviously not a comet ketuf. All right.
Is the third one there? It's not close, is it? Third common.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, it isn't closed. So yeah, you should have that metag there, but I'm not going to worry too much about the metag thing. Obviously, I didn't. Once I get the vowel points down and the accents, I think I'm doing pretty good. But mainly the endings. See how important it is to know the endings. All right. So let's say the endings again. Blank, ta, ti, u, ten, new. One more time. Blank, ta, ti, u, ten, new. Now you got to know how to spell them too. Right. And remember to put the dogish lane in the tabs. Every one of the tabs, and I forgot them here, but every one of these tabs has a dogish lane. Okay? It's really not going to be that tough. It's really not even going to be as tough as I think the grammar wants it to be. Alright? In fact, if you're used to Greek, it's going to be a piece of cake in terms of endings. The number of things you have to memorize, that's not the difficulty. The difficulty is the exceptions to the rules all the time. Weak verbs. I mean, you probably have as many exceptions as you have non-exceptions. In other words, you probably have as many words that are, deviating from the norm somehow as words that don't. That's the thing that's tough. So you just have to kind of relax and feel it, right? And be able to deal with it in that way. All right. So that's what you have to know for next time and forever. Cold, those endings. If you can figure out, I would also encourage you to learn how to spell that whole thing that we have on the board here. However you do that. If you just memorize that.
Was the call verb or just the ending?
Katal, with the katal verb.
The whole thing.
But learn those things separately. Be able to recite and write blank, ta, ti, u, ten, nu. Right? Be able to recite that, be able to write that. Also, be able to write the paradigm with the katal verb. But if you start the way I did, put the consonants down and the ending. It shouldn't be that tough to derive the spelling of it. Remember, because you're going right back to the 3MS form as much as possible. So every time you can, the lamed gets a shavah, because it doesn't have a vowel in the original form. Right? Every time you can, the lamed gets a shavah. And every form has a shavah. So if the lamed doesn't get the shavah, the tape gets a shavah. Right? And when you get to those 10-10 forms, the longest forms, you end up reducing the vowels more. So the Lama gets a Shiva and the Kof gets a Shiva. If you remember that, you're good to go. Also, you want to try to keep the accent on the Tate syllable, if possible, right? You can't though. If the Tate gets a Shiva, the accent can't go there. Plus, just remember, on the 10 and 10, the accent goes on those last syllables. So you have about, you have 4 or 5 things to remember, and you can spell all of those things. Now, if you find it easier just to memorize them, just by rote, then that's fine too. Yes.
So these verb changes are going to be pretty consistent from verb to verb. I mean, once we get
Strong verbs.
Right. That's what I was.
Right. So if you took verbs like we have on our quiz, for example, if you took shavat, that's a strong verb. That's gonna spell exactly like that. Okay. Now akal is a weak verb, so that can change some. Right? So first of all, what's akal going to do? When you get over here to having a shiva under the first root letter, a guttural can't take a shiva, so you're going to have a reduced vowel there.
But the formative, they stay the same, right? On the weak.
They all say that the formative stays the same on all. But who's going to lose sleep over a shiva or reduced vowel? What's the difference between friends, right? No big deal.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still not understanding why the Kof gets a Shabbat in the second plural form.
Well, the main reason is because it just does. I mean, that's the bottom line.
I didn't know that.
If we can sort of in our mind, whether it's a linguistically sound reason or whether it's just a reason that helps us memorize it, it doesn't really matter to me so much in the issue of forms. I'm willing to come up with principles when it comes to memorizing forms that might really have nothing to do with the true linguistics of the language, right? But if it's a principle I can see to help me memorize the form, it works. Now, because that doesn't have anything to do with interpretation, right? We're just talking about identifying a form. When linguistics impinges on interpretation, then we need it to be accurate. But to me, I'm just saying that we have so many vowels in that word. We have a sabol vowel at the end. But we do have a shivan or the lamed. But and remember, we're writing this, but it's a spoken language. So just in speaking it, I've got a long word. Even we do that too. I mean, we don't linger on the beginning of a word very much. So they're going to want to get. It's a long word. They're going to want to get through it, so they're not going to linger on that word. So you don't want a long word all heavy and full of vowels. You're going to start reducing vowels. And we saw the same thing happen when we started having pronominal suffixes, right? We saw the initial vowel reducing for in my mind the same reason. I think it's a pronunciation issue. So if I have a long word like katalten, I'm not going to take the time in the beginning of it to say katalten. That in speech that's going to get reduced, katalten, which is exactly what we do with English sometimes. In the same, even if we spelled that, if we had a word that was pronounced katalten and we were saying it, if somebody actually said katalten, they'd sound funny because we'd say katalten, right? Only we don't distinguish between reduced vowels and stuff in English. If we did, we'd probably have a reduced vowel there too.
So if there's a different vowel point in the root verb, is it similar to Shabbat being for those plural?
For the strong verbs.
For the strong.
The strong verbs really are all going to have the same.
So typically you're always going to have Shabbat on the first letter of.
You're going to have a shiva, but maybe with a reduced vowel, even if you have a guttural in those forms, right? So you're going to have a shiva by itself or a shiva with something, one way or another. Okay. You can see at the bottom of page 141, the same thing done with all kinds of different strong verbs right there, right? Yeshav, Zakar, Katav, Shamar, Kavatz. And you see that they all have the same vowel pattern in the lexical form, right? They all have the same suffirmatives or endings, right? I like endings, it's just a shorter word. Maybe it's not as sophisticated though. They all have the same ending, and they all have the same spelling other than the three root consonants, right? Can you feel it? Yes.
Okay. Back to Cathal. How do you know, or how would you know if you kill would be singular, you kill versus you kill? How would you know?
Well, in English, you see, in English, only context helps you know that. But in Hebrew, there's a different form for that. So if the author is talking, says you killed him, and it's singular, he's talking to one person or about one person.
But you'd have to use the whole passage to decipher, to interpret it.
Not in Hebrew. No, in Hebrew it's clear. In English it's
Verse
not.
CP versus the second.
So,
All you have to do is look at the verb and see if the subject is singular or plural. Was it more than one person that killed, or was it one person that killed? In Hebrew, we don't even need context for that. It'll be clear by the form of the verb.
right.
But in English, that's where we need the context. And that's why when we're giving translations, we might put you plural with a parenthesis and a PL after our translation. Or you with a parenthesis and an SE for singular.
Yeah.
Or you can say y'all.
That's the new Mississippi.
Yeah.
Y'all killed him.
Right, that's like King James style. That's why one of the reasons the ye and the.
Right, well, yeah. Back then, English did distinguish between ye and you. I guess ye is singular. Ye, take ye, ye is plural. And you is plural in Old English. But see, we don't make that distinction anymore. So I guess if you're into the King James thing, you can. If you're into the Episcopal translation, isn't it great? You can use that in your translations. Ye and you. And
So
thou and thee.
Ye is plural.
Huh?
Is ye?
Yeah, ye is singular.
Ye is singular.
You singular, use plural, so you all like double.
That's right.
So, but we would still need, if we were to put the second female plural, let's just take that one.
Feminine.
We still need the rest of the sentence, lexical form, to know what we were talking about.
Well, this is a transitive verb, so it wants an object, but you really only have to have two words here in Hebrew to make a sentence. You could have.
But you killed what?
You could have Yeshavt ha'adam. You killed the man. And now we know, with that form, we know it is a woman. Not only do we know it's singular, but we know it's one woman who killed one man.
Yeah.
Now, in English, if I said, you killed the man, I don't know if it's a man or a woman. I don't know if it's singular or plural. But I do know that the man, at least, is singular.
So once we memorize that, we'll know.
You see a form like that in the Bible,
We'll know.
you'll know. You'll know that's one woman, or one man, or more than one woman, or more than one man. Whereas in English, you wouldn't know. You have to use the context. But in Hebrew, you don't need context to know that. Now, there are common forms in the first person. If it is I killed a man, you'd have to know who the I was to know if it was a man or a woman. But you'd know it was one person.
Right.
Or if it is they killed a man, you'd have to know the context to know if they was masculine or singular or both. And either masculine or feminine or include both. But you'd know it's plural. And the same thing with we. If it said we killed a man, you would know if it's masculine or feminine, or if there are men or women doing it, or both. But you'd know that it was more than one person. Okay. Good questions. That's what we're looking for. All right, top of page 142. We ought to notice a couple of interesting things. verbal roots ending in tav. When you have tav, what's going to happen? They're going to assimilate. Remember, the dogish lene doesn't double the tav. The dogish lene hardens the sound of it. So if my stem ends in a tav, now I replace the dogish lene in the tav of the ending with a dogish forte.
You only know that because you know the root.
Right. See, I'm not going to write tav. I'm going to write tav dogish. See? Just like in Greek, you're not going to write pi sigma. You're going to write C.
That's going to change your vowel points, right? Because you're going to change the rules.
Well, yeah, potentially because you're shortening up the word. However, still notice the endings are the same. Tot, T, ten, right? But if the root ends in a tav, it's only going to matter when the ending begins with a tav, right? So that's why they didn't give them all. They don't all begin with a tav. Okay. Roots ending in noon, same thing. You know, in the first common plural, for example, you're not going to write two noons. You're going to just put a dogish in one of the noons and call it good. Notice also that noon tav can also become tav with the dogish in it. Noon, you need to know, just be aware right now that noon is a letter that likes to assimilate. It likes to disappear and become a dogish. Right? So even when you have a noon at the end of your root letter and a tav next, that noon can disappear right into that tav very easily. Right? So just remember, noon is a letter that likes to disappear and become a dogish. We're going to see that's going to become particularly important when we see nifals. Right? There's a noon, obviously, and a nifal, and an imperfect. We're going to see it assimilate. Anybody have any issues with the meaning of a stative verb?
I see in transitives, I was trying to think, like, to live is gain, or to live is death. You know, I'm trying to think that the idea of the intransitive is it couldn't take on an object. You know, I read a book where it takes on an object, but...
Well, some verbs can be both, like I read. You don't have to have an object for it.
So it's purely contextual.
But there are some verbs that can't take an object. Let's see if we can think of them. I died. That can't take an object.
Unless it's spelled different, and then
You could die your shirt. Right, that's right. And that would be a word that would probably have to take an object. You wouldn't say, I died. You know, like a coloring thing. You'd say, I dyed my shirt.
I died would be stated.
No, I died would be an intransitive verb.
If you become dead, then become deceased.
But yeah, you know, but if there's a verb that says I am dead. But see, in English we don't really have single verbs that are stated except verbs of being. In English, we use a verb of being and an adjective to make a stated verb idea.
Like I'm honored, stated that I died because you did something.
Well, look at the verb gadol. Now, gadol as an adjective means great, right? Well, the verb gadol means what? Be great. So in English, even in the definition of it in English, we have to use a verb of being and an adjective. Because we don't have really, I mean, if we have a stated verb, that whole idea of be great, if you want to call that whole thing, but really what we have is a verb of being, I am, and then a predicate adjective. I am great. See? And it's the same thing with kaved. I'm heavy. heavy, he's my brother. But again, I have to use I am heavy or I am small. In Hebrew, you don't have to use a verb of being. It's just there's a verb that means to be small.
So it'd be like, I have your I small, really would be the
Yeah.
literal translation.
Yes. I have, or something like that. We talked about parsing, right? When we're parsing, I'd rather have you do it the way he does it instead of the way he says for you to do it. Parsing, we want to know the stem, cal, the aspect, or tense. I'm sure you'll hear me call it tense a lot. The stem, cal, the tense, perfect, and then the person, gender, and number. First, common, singular. Then the vocabulary form, zakar, and then the meaning of the vocabulary form, I remember. Now he's saying you don't have to have the meaning of the vocabulary form on the parsing, but I want you to do that. I want you to do it exactly like he has it written here. See it right there? Near the top of page 145. Okay. Cal perfect 2FS from Shamar. He's giving you an actual translation of the word you're parsing. I'm saying give the meaning of the vocabulary word. So it would always be he remembered, or he observed, or to remember, or to observe, or something like that. Now, if you gave a translation of the actual word you're parsing and said I remembered instead of he remembered or to remember, nobody's going to mark that wrong. But really, the form you want to have is the stem, the tense or aspect, the person, gender, number, vocabulary form, meaning of the vocabulary form. Okay. So cal perfect 1CS, or hifil perfect, or PL imperfect, or whatever. So when we talk about parsing verbs, then that's the form that we want to do. So you want to mark that and know that. Okay. So with the perfect and the imperfect, you get the negative particle lo. Outside the perfect and the imperfect, you get the negative particle all. Haven't we learned both of those?
Yes.
All right. It's like in Greek with the indicative, you use u, and outside the indicative, you use me. So that tells you that your perfect and imperfect aspects or tenses are functioning like an indicative would be. From the standpoint of the writer, he is making a statement that's true to reality, or he's presenting it in that way. I did this, or I will do that, or I do that, or something like that. Whereas you get into an imperative, that's a command, right? So, that's a potential mood or a potential kind of aspect, right? So that's why you have a difference between the use of lo and the use of all. Okay. The particle na, pretty self-explanatory if you read it. You can stick pronominal suffixes on the back of it. And he goes over the uses for that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay. Vocabulary on page 148. Repeat after me. Page 148. Barak. To bless. Zakar. To remember. Zakain. To be or become old. How are you going to remember that? Walk with a cane. There you go. See? And let me tell you, strive for the mnemonic devices like that. Because I'll tell you by experience, you will not maintain them long term without one. Almost certainly. And it's very difficult, let's at least put it that way. It's very difficult for you to all these myriads of vocabulary words that have no connection to anything, unless you're constantly reviewing them, you won't really hang on to them unless you can hang on to that memory device. Okay? So really, for every word, think of some weird way that you're going to remember what it means. Chazak, to be or become strong. Yada, to know. Kaved, to be heavy. Well, that's related to the word kavod, glory. So once you remember kavod, that can be your device for remembering kaved. Ichabod, crane, glory departed. So this, how are you going to remember that? Right? So you can come up with those kind of words of remembering. Yada, I remember that by Yada, no. Right? Yada, know that, no. So as silly as they are, that's what works. Katav, to write. Now, probably some of the first vocabulary words you learn, you could probably remember them forever without a memory device. But that part of your brain gets filled up pretty quick, if it's like mine. And maybe your brain isn't like mine. It probably is better than mine, I would imagine. All right, let's see, where are we at here? Malay. To be fulfill. Malak. To reign, to be king. Matzah. To find. Now the matzah crackers, right? It's a good way to remember that. In the middle of the Seder service, they take some away and then you have to go find it later. Pakad. Actually, it's just a pakad. To visit, to number, to appoint. Shakav. To lie down or have sexual intercourse. You can say that in seminary, can't you? Yes. Shalak. To stretch out, to let go, to send. And Shamar. To keep, watch, guard, observe. Alright? That's good stuff at the end of these chapters. I know you're reading them. Alright, the weak verb. Now remember, the Roman numerals stand for the first root consonant, the second root consonant, the third root consonant. Right? The thing about this is that all of the endings are all the same in all of these. So if you know the vocabulary form, Ahmad, Bachar, Shama, Katal, such a strong word. It isn't too hard to deal with these, right? The difficulty, there are two difficulties in dealing with the changes that we have in the first difficulty is with some of them, being able to look at the form you have in the text and determine the vocabulary form. Remember I told you that probably the hardest thing about Hebrew was being able to figure out how to look the word up, because you got to know what the vocabulary form is, and the word you're seeing on the page may be missing letters and everything else, and certainly adding letters. So you got to be able to determine what the vocabulary form is. So that's one of the things that are at issue with these changes in the root verb. The second thing that is at issue is when we get to the other stems, PL stem, PUAL stem, those sorts of things, right? Those are going to be distinguished by different vocalizations, in other words, different vowel points. Right? So if I have a cow stem that has unusual vowel points from what I've learned as the cow stem, okay, I could be confusing. I could say, oh, those aren't usual vowel points. That must mean that's a different stem. See? Because that's what's going to clue me in the future, right, to the fact that I have something other than a cow stem. Same endings, fortunately, right? Different vowel points. Well, the thing that's going to save me on that is if I really have a good grasp of what those different vowel points are for a PUAL. Guess what? It's going to have a segol in it, right? PUAL. For the PL. If I really have a good grasp of how those other stems differ and form their vowels, the way they're spelled, then if I focus in on that, and I know I have a weak verb by looking at it, right? Or at least I could guess probably I have a weak verb. I can look at that and say, well, I have a difference of vowel pointing here, but it isn't the same difference I would expect for a PL or a QL or something like that. Then I can say, well, even though I have a difference of vowel pointing, I almost certainly have a cow. Now, doing it this way, is it going to mean that you're going to be able to parse a word with 100% certainty every time out of the box? No. So what are you going to do? You're going to look it up in BDB. Remember how we were doing it? Oh, I found my form. I think I know what it is, right? So I'm going to look and see. And then when I find my form, I say, yes, now I know that, at least according to BDB, that's what it is. And, when you agree with BDB, that's strong evidence. Right? So, if you want to memorize all of these things, and there's still going to be exceptions apart from that, if you want to just memorize all of these forms, so that when you see it in the Bible, you can parse with 100% certainty, that would be very laudable, and you may do so. What happens is, over time, when you're reading, you become more and more certain of your parsing. Now, if you're going to offer a translation, to be put in the next, translation of the Bible to be sold at bookstores to evangelicals around the world, that's where you need to be absolutely sure of your parsing, right? You see what I mean? And it's not like it's less important to preach accurately on a Sunday, but obviously one sermon has different import than a translation of the Bible that's going to be sold at evangelicals around the world, right? We still want to have a high degree of certainty. But that comes as you get experience in the text. You become more confident in what you're doing, right? Still a good idea to check yourself. And if your translation differs wildly from the New American Standard, find out why. Be sure you know why. Now, not to say that it shouldn't necessarily differ, but if it does differ, make sure you're on solid ground and you know why. In other words, when your translation differs, find the form in BDP. Make sure you're parsing it. See what I mean? It's a little bit different than in Greek, just because of the number of exceptions, right? In Greek, you can look at a form and most of the time be real confident. That's what it is. Because I have those endings down. Right? In Hebrew, there's a little bit of wiggle room. You understand what I'm saying? Are you comfortable with wiggle room? Or if you're not, memorize them all. You will not be quizzed on all of it. So, what's happening? All right. Where we have a guttural in the first instance, where we have shavahs on the first letter, you can't have a shavah on the first letter because it's guttural. So you're going to have a katef patah there in this case. Where you have a guttural in the middle, where you have a shavah on the middle root letter, can't do that if you have a guttural in the middle. So what are you going to have? Katef patah. That doesn't bother you. That doesn't throw you for that big a loop, does it you? Because I already know that gutturals work that way. All right. So for me to memorize the spelling of that whole paradigm, it's a waste of time. It's just not going to bother me that much, right? If in the third letter I have a chet or an ayin, what's going to be happening? Well, not a lot, really. The ayin, now the chet's not going to be able to take a shavah, but the ayin can here, right? So, like in the third form down, if I had a chet there, the shavah or the ayin would have to change to a reduced vowel, right? The ayin, it'll work as an ayin, but not a chet. So,
how come it's taking the shavah?
Yeah, ayin used to do that.
It's just one of the weird ones, right?
Well, actually, let me back up. Just a moment. Gutturals can take silent shavahs, but not vocal shavahs. And that's a silent shavah. So I have to back up about that. I don't expect the hate would though. You can compare it to the strong verb right there. All right. So those weak verbs are really not that big of a problem, right? Some changes, but frankly, I'm probably not even going to notice the changes in my text, right? No big deal. I know they exist. I'm happy I can deal with it. Now, what if I have in the third place an olive? Well, I end up with a quiescent olive. I'm allowed to have a quiescent olive, so I don't need to have a shavah where I would have put a shavah before. Right? And there aren't in the 3CP form, that's kind of odd there because you have an olive and then an oo. But again, that's just a quiescent olive. So if I see that and I'm saying, hey, there's supposed to be a shavah there, and there's not, what's going on? Well, I remember that I'm allowed to have a quiescent olive. Right? And really, a quiescent olive equals an olive with a shavah, silent shavah, doesn't it? So it's really just a different way to spell the same thing. All right. Now, a couple of them, we really have to pay attention to what's happening. All right. If I have in the third root letter a hey, now that's going to go nuts on me. Right? What's going to happen? Well, the hey is going to drop out of every one of the forms. And he explains why you actually have the hey there in the 3MS. That actually turns out to be a vowel that's stuck on there. And it looks like the hey is there, but I guess it's not. But what's going to happen to the hey throughout the rest of the paradigm? The hey is going to turn to a hirik yod where it can. Okay? There are a couple places where it can't, and in those cases it turns to a tav. Look at the second form. You couldn't have a hirik yod there because then you'd have a hirik yod, which is a vowel, followed by a vowel. Can't do that. So instead I'm going to put a tav there. Okay? Seems to me there was another place where it did that. Oh, and the 3CP. Again, I can't have a hirik yod and a shurik, two vowels in a row. So the hirik yod just drops out at that point. So that's something to make a note of. You know, a third radical, same thing as a root letter, same thing as a third consonant. A third radical hey verb, that hey is going to want to turn into a hirik yod. That's weird. But you start saying words like bana in these forms, and you start getting used to it, and you really don't even think about it. Okay? But that's something to make note of. Now, he's suggesting that you should actually memorize that paradigm. If you want to memorize that paradigm, you're welcome to memorize that paradigm. It would be better for you. It'd be awesome. But I think I can deal with the fact that, you know, if I see that, I can probably remember, oh, a hey in that third position basically turns to a hirik yod when it can. And if I have something else, I can probably figure out why. But in all these cases, the endings are the same, aren't they? What are they? Blank, ta, t, u, ten. So my difficulty is not so much with parsing in terms of figuring out the person, gender, and number, because that ending's going to be there to tell me. My difficulty is going to come in what's the vocabulary form. If I see vanu, now if I knew it was a verb, that would help me. But I've also got other words like bane, right? Son, that take pronominal suffixes that look a lot like these, right? So when I see it, I might not even be sure it's a verb. Is it bane? And remember, when they take pronominal suffixes, they do vowel point changes, right? Now, I don't remember this as being one of the vowel point changes for bane with the pronominal suffixes, but I could be thinking that, right? So the hard part is, what word do I have here?
Son or
Yeah, is it son or bean is another verb that means to understand. And guess what happens to that yod in the middle, the hollow verb? It's dropping out all the time. So a beit, noon, could be from that verb. But it's being with the hirig, so that's not going to fit this pattern, right? So a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I've got a beit and a noon here, right? What am I going to look up? Well, let's stick something on the end of it. What can be on the end of it? Well, a weak letter. What's the weak letter that's going to drop out a lot? Hey. So look up, beit, noon, hey. Other weak letters, all start. But at least if it is a beit, noon word, then I can get in the beit, noon part of the dictionary, right? Lexicon. And start looking, right? And see. Now, sometimes things drop off of the front, so that makes it even more difficult, doesn't it? So that's the difficulty that we're dealing with here, is trying to figure out what word this comes from. See? And the second difficulty is what stem is it? Because the vowel pointing is going to indicate stem for me. But when I see all of those cometzim, all the comets under the beits, okay. Now, a hiphil has a hirig yod in the middle of it, and that's one of the markers of a hiphil. So I could be real flipped out by this hiphil, by this hirig yod right here, right? But what goes along with the hiphil in the perfect? Hiphil. There's got to be a hey on the front of it. So if there's not a hey on the front of it, then I can forget about the hiphil.
So you wouldn't find it there as a vocabulary form. You'd still go back here.
Where?
To beit, noon,
Hey.
hey. You would never find it under the ta, hirig, yod.
Under the what?
You would never find it under the hirig, yod. The vocabulary form would be here.
Oh, never find that in the dictionary. That's right. All of those forms under the first one there, you'd never find them. You find them in the dictionary, but not as entries.
If you down
Now, if you look at bana, let's just take a look at it. If you look at bana,
see, this is fine.
yeah. Okay. Now I got Bane, and if I really freaked out, I can start looking at the forms of Bane and see if I can find it. But let's see if I can find an entry. Bane. Okay, let's see. Let's say we have the very last form there. Okay, let's say that's in our text. The very last form, Baninu. Okay. Oh man. Okay. Bano.
We don't use vowel points, maybe 123.
Yeah, because that's going to be the root. Where are you looking at?
Look at the page, top of page 123. Yeah, it says the Ninu one. I mean, it could be Ninu or could be.
You don't have vowel points there?
Not on the headings. Yeah.
Oh, on the headings. Yeah, well, look at, that's actually, it's kind of interesting because there's our form right there.
Oh, yeah, on top, right underneath it, okay.
Okay, noun, that's really interesting because there's an ambiguity there, because that could mean our son. Noun with a pronominal suffix, and it's masculine. Well, wait a second. No, because that under the beit is a shabbat, not a comment. So pay attention, right? So that's not exactly our form, but it's close. See the deal here, right? That's why it helps to do it with more than one person, because you get more than one idea of what to look up. Okay, huh? All right. Well, now I found on page 124. I found a verb bana. Right. So I'm going to look I'm going to look on the forms that I'm given under Bana and see. Baniti. Okay, and I might not find my exact form because this is going to be a word that's going to be used a lot. But I can find Baniti, and that's going to tell me how that paradigm is going to go, isn't it? And I can easily substitute nu for T, because I recognize T as a perfect ending, right? Tell me it's perfect here, right? Blank, ta, the T, but that's singular. What if I slip nu in there instead of T, which is plural? Then I actually get my form right there, see? So I might have to do a little bit of substituting, because it's not going to give me every single possible form of the word, maybe.
I'm feeling kind of slow. So now we can't find the word we're looking for, and I see the word bana. So where are you looking for bani? What do you?
Okay, see where it says cow?
Yeah.
Perfect. And then it gives a base, the prime, so it's just not telling you much right there. And then it's going to give me some verses, right, where this word is used, and the form in that verse. Okay? So I have banta, and then I have bonita. Now I'm getting a picture of what can happen here with this paradigm. And I'm also remembering, this is what I'm saying, it's important to remember, when the verb ends in hey, it turns to a hirit yod, where it can. Or where it can't, it disappears or turns to a ta. Banita. Ubanita. You see what I'm reading? Banit. Baniti. That gives me plural. Bano. Banu. And I can see that. See my 3CP right there? It's giving me that form. But it's just not going to give me all the plurals. But I can form the plural off of this first person singular right there, see it? So again, I can be fairly confident that that's where my form comes from. Is that making sense to you, Adam?
I don't have my.
Oh, you never dictionary? All right.
It helps that.
So that's the challenge. So just so you know what the challenge is, so you can remember that. Right? Every day you spend in Hebrew, you have more respect for your pastor.
My pastor didn't take Hebrew.
Never mind. Well, now you know why he did that.
I did that in Multiple Bible College.
Well, now you can't say, he didn't even know Hebrew. It's like, not like it's something you do.
That's not practice.
All right, so that's the hey verb. Now we have doubly weak verbs. Sometimes you have verbs with more than one weak letter in them, and that's one of our vocabulary words. The word ra'ah is doubly weak. So what's the hey going to do? The hey is going to do what heys do. Turn to the hirit yod where they can. Where they can't, they do something else. Right? And the aleph not bothering me too much, because all I'm doing is having a reduced vowel with the aleph instead of a shavah on at least one occasion here. But other than that, it doesn't really affect much, right? All right. Now, so the real thing that I need to remember is what happens when a hey falls in the third consonant. That's sticky, right? It basically turns to a hirit yod. There's some forms where it can't, so it turns to a tav, or it drops out. But when it can, it turns to a hirit yod.
So like in the 3FS, the reason that it can't is because of the vowel and what's following.
Yeah, you'd have two vowels in a row.
Okay, so that's the
Can't
whole
read
reason.
that. Same thing with the one where it drops out. If it didn't drop out, you'd have two vowels in a row. Now, and hopefully you're learning an approach to this as well as we talk about this. All right? And I'm trying to let you know what to look for How am I going to be able to? How am I going to remember what I need to so I can distinguish? I can get to the vocabulary form. And how am I going to remember what I need to distinguish it from other stems? Well, to a certain extent, you don't know, so I'll try to tell you what you need to know. All right. Now, what are geminate verbs? Well, geminate verbs are verbs that have the second and third consonants alike. Remember twins, Gemini? So what happens when you have geminate verbs? And there are some. A strong geminate verb, a weak geminate, weak 1 and 2, all kinds of things can happen. The basic thing you need to look out for is the whole 2 letters becoming one with a dogish. Right? We're kind of used to looking for that and seeing that. But with a resh can't take a dogish. So when that second resh drops out, I don't get a dogish in the resh, it just drops out. See? So that's basically the effect I'm going to see anyway. The Tom, notice how even in my vocabulary form at that point, or really maybe not the vocabulary form, but the third masculine singular form, Tom, that other name is just totally gone. And in all the other forms I have a dogish, but I don't even have a dogish in the 3MS. But I'm not so sure. Well, again, if we're looking it up, remember, you may go on a wild goose chase and look up, samek, bait, hay. Oh, hey, it's dropped out. But I'm not having a here it goes. What do I have here where my letter drops out typically? I'm talking about the geminate verbs, that chart on the bottom of page 156. What happens with the geminate verbs?
It's like a hole.
That's right. You get a hole and ball. So when a hay drops out, you get a here it goes. You need to remember this. When a double consonant assimilates, it's replaced by a hole and ball, typically, in the paradigm. Right? To me, it's a whole lot easier to remember those principles than to memorize the whole spelling of the paradigm. Right? Now, some of them, the double consonant doesn't drop out. So I'm happy. If I see that, it's not going to be hard to look it up. Okay? But if I see a dogish in that bait right there, and a hole involved, that's going to be an indication that I have a geminate verb. And so when I'm looking it up, I'm going to know to look it up under samek, bait. Now, let me just alert you to something. What's one of the markers for the PL? Dogish in the middle root letter. What's happened to these twin, with the twin consonants assimilate, you end up with a dogish in the middle root letter, right? But I don't have the right vowel points for a PL. See? I don't have the right vowel points for a PL. So I guess it'd be, a little dicey. You get a little detective work here and there, right? But just remember the things that can happen. So when you're looking it up, so if you see a word that looks like the root is samek, bait, holem vav. Well, holem vav is not going to be part of the root on in the middle of 2 consonants, maybe if it's a hollow verb. Not as a third. You can't have a holem vav as a third root consonant, right? So what's going on there? What's going to drop out? And start thinking of the letters that can drop out. Well, you're going to think of hay, but also think of assimilation, because we really have not as a drop out here, but the 2 letters that are the same assimilating to one another. Right? So I've got to pay attention to that. So I want to look up saval. All right.
And finally, to curse.
Huh?
How do you pronounce to curse? How do you do the double ray?
Arar.
Arar?
What's our
Arar?
Arar. Arota.
So it'd be Arar.
It's so hot here.
It is hot.
Combination.
Insulation, body, sun.
Was it the sun or was it the heater? So was it
I don't know, 10.
the heat's on?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. And of course, the thermostats are low.
Yeah, well,
Someone here should have key.
All right, one more thing. Biconsonantal verbs or hollow verbs, verbs that at least appear to have two root consonants. You can see calm, psalm, ba. Now we've learned at least some of these in vocabulary. Coom, we've learned that one. Maybe not. Well, it's hard for me to keep it straight because I know it and I can't remember why I know it. Is it because it's in this chapter? Coom is a vocabulary form of that. It means to rise or arise. Psalm, the vocabulary form of that is seem with a hiric yod, and it means to put or place. And I know we've learned this one. Ba is the form of bow. We just learned bow with a full and bob in the middle of those two, and that means to go, doesn't it?
We learned it yet, but we will.
Actually, we're learning Psalms.
I'm sorry, it's in this chapter. Okay. Well, all of these are in this chapter, at least two of them. Yeah, they're all in this chapter. So they are in the chapters, just that we're not there yet. Being a professor is hard. Being president is hard too, but so it's a lot better to be on this side of the table. That's good. All right. So what are we going to do with these hollow verbs?
Fill them up with salt.
All right. Okay. So look at the paradigm chart on page 158. Okay. Now, what I've learned for my vocabulary is coom. But do I see coom? Well, I do see coom because that's an infinitive construct, right? That's not the cal perfect 3ms form. It is the cal infinitive construct form. But what's the cal perfect 3ms form look like? Well, calm. Really, as if I'm just missing that middle letter, right? With a potok under it, right? Come on. I'm just missing that middle letter again. Kamta, kamt, kamti, kamu. So really, it's just as if that whole middle letter and the vowel that went with it got erased. Right? Hollow verbs. Can you deal with that?
So you're saying that when we look it up here, there's going to be still 3 letters.
That's right, but the middle letter is going to be a vowel, a bob, or a yod. So here's the issue, right? Practically speaking, if you're looking at a form, you know it's a verb, it's got the blank autophagy with 10 new endings, and you have 3 consonants, you're good to go. Strong verb. Or it could be a weak verb that hasn't dropped a consonant, right? So if you got the 3 consonants and the ending stuck on the back of it, we can deal with that. We can look it up. See, and that becomes a critical issue, being able to look it up in the lexicon. I can look it up. I'm good to go. The problem comes when something happened and I don't have all 3 root letters. How am I going to look it up? That's the main thing. Because if I can't look it up, I have nowhere to go. I have no home, right? If I can't look it up. If I can look it up, I can almost certainly end up parsing it. So I'll find a form close to mine or exactly like the one I'm looking at, and I'll be able to figure out how to parse it. So what are my options then? Now, if you can remember that if I'm looking at hiric yod in the form, what am I going to be thinking? Drop the hay off the end of that stem. Right? If I'm looking at a hole and bob, and I have a doggish in the second consonant, what's a possibility? Gemini. Now here's another layer of complexity. Right? I might have a letter missing from the middle of it. 2 consonants. I might have the third consonant missing. I might also have a letter missing from the middle of it. So if I look up the 2 consonants with the hey on the end and don't find it, and I look up the 2 consonants with a doubling of the second consonant and don't find it. Now try looking up the 2 consonants either with a vowel between them or a yod between them.
Non-noon. You mentioned noons were weak, but not that situation.
Well, a noon can drop out. Yeah, that's another thing to think about. A noon can drop out. When it does, it usually leaves a dog or someplace if it can. If it can. So you could have it's kind of good you brought that up because you could have a noon assimilating into a tom of the ending, right? That's another thing to remember. So in your mind, you're thinking, haze, doubling, noons dropping out, or something weak, a hollow verb, something in the middle of those 2. So again, the last form of kum there, if I found kam nu in my text, well, I don't have any added vowels like a hirik yod or a cholam vav. And I don't see a dogish. I could have a noon assimilating into the noon of the ending real easily, but I don't have a dogish, right? So that's unlikely. So, I could look up kof, main, hey. And I may find a word that's kof, main, hey. I don't know. But I won't find this form under it. I should find enough forms under it to indicate that that's not my word. I might look up kof, main, see what I find. But that's not my word. I may look up kof, main, noon, because maybe the noon dropped out. But if I'm remembering these principles, right, the first thing I'm going to look for is kof, yod, main, or kof, vav, main. Right? Because I'm not saying a hirik or an added tom. I'm not saying a whole vav or an added anything. So let me just assume I'm starting with 2 consonants. So if I do that, I look at kof, kof, vav, hey, kava. But in that case, the vav isn't a vowel; it's a consonant, right? A bunch of you didn't bring your VDB. Get the VDB out. It's a big book. This actually, your ability to use VDB becomes the critical issue, right? With doing our VDB.
I'm hoping that this program is taking the letters of the computer.
Well, I have on my Mac, and that's what's really cool. I have on my Mac. You bring up the text, point to the letter, it parses it for you. But if that's what you rely on from the beginning, you're never going to learn Hebrew. You might as well just call it a tools course and be done with it. Basically.
So we're looking up.
But from where I'm at, but from where I'm coming from, having spent the time in it, then that becomes really nice because I can take a shortcut to it. I'm not gaining on my Hebrew when I do that, but I'm using my Hebrew, and then I can look at the text and go, okay, I got it. If you never spent the time, you'd just be juggling spitballs at that point, really. All right, so I see kava, but that's not getting me anywhere.
Whatever the translation.
Oh, well, look, I'm trying to find the form on the chart on page 158. The very last form of kum, kam nu. If I'm on page 876. 876. So I see kava, I see kut, but I'm looking for a main. I see kol, That's a noun masculine. That's a vocabulary word. Coal. What was that? Voice. That's right. So all this stuff on coal. And then I see 877, coom. Could that be my word? It could be my word. All right? But I'm going to try to check it out. A whole bunch of etymology stuff. Cow, right there. I can't see the bold cow. Com, okay. That's the vav consecutive. That's a weird form there, isn't it? Com-ta. So now I'm seeing a perfect form with just a kof, main, and an ending, right? So now I can look at that and go, what I have is a kof, main, and an ending. So I'm feeling pretty good now. If this is all they give me, I can figure it out. But let's just see if I get it my actual form. No, because I've already gone on to the imperfect. Once I've gone on to the imperfect, then I'm done. I know I don't have an imperfect here, so I don't have a performance.
Why don't we have an imperfect? Or how do we know that?
Because we haven't studied that yet. No, because I don't have a preformative, and I recognize my perfect ending. If I had the end of an imperfect without the preformative, that'd be an imperative. That's how you form an imperative. But I don't have that.
Endings that were
Because the endings on an imperfect, yiktol, tiktol, tiktol, tixtalu, ektol. That's the singular. Yiktolu, tiktolna, tiktalu, tiktolna, ektol. Okay, so I don't have that. So I'm real confident that what I have is this com-ta, but with a different ending, com-nu. And the reason they don't give me all the forms is because seeing how they're formed, I can just change the ending.
right.
You understand that? That you can look at the form here and just change the ending and get our form right there. Right? So, coom, what's it mean? Well, it means arise, stand up, stand. So my ending then I would have a cal, perfect, 1 CP from coom to stand, arise, whatever. See how that works? So the big issue when it comes to these weak verbs is can I backwards engineer it, in other words. Right? It's kind of like I have a software program and I need to backwards engineer it to see how it was put together. So can I backwards engineer it so that I can get the vocabulary form? Secondly, can I look at it and say that's a cow or a PAO or whatever? Right?
So com-nu would be where we stand.
Right. So, but in my parsing, I'm going to put the meaning of the vocabulary word, not the meaning of the word I'm looking at or parsing. But the thing of it is, once I look it up, once I get to the vocabulary form and I can look it up, being able to distinguish between a cal and a PL and all that kind of stuff is less important because this is going to distinguish it for me. Right? So I can look in here and I can see, okay, well there isn't even a PL form of this word, but there's a poleo form, a hit poleo, and a hit feel, and I can see, didn't even give a perfect form of a poleo, but I don't have a poleo here. I don't have a hit poleo because I don't have a hit on the front of it. I don't have a hit feel because I don't have a hit on the front of it. So I'm good to go for a cow. See? Once I can look it up, it'll take me a while maybe, but I can get the information. Now, if I can also remember how to distinguish the stems, then I don't have to struggle so much once I look it up.
You know exactly what section to look at.
Well, yeah, I think that's a cow. There it is. Yeah, I'm good to go. I'm just going to do it. Okay, so that is cow, wheat, bird. Now here I dog-eared my page right here for reference 160 because there it is. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if you want to, you could memorize all of those.
Let me do it.
I haven't. It'd be good for you if you did, but yeah, I think it's better to know the principles and try to feel your way through it. But to do that, you've got to know the strong verb, right? The endings and how to spell it. Gotta know how that works. Blank, ot, t, u, ten, you. Gotta know that in your sleep. Alright, vocabulary, page 160. Bow, to go in, enter, come. Bana, to build. Yalad, to bring forth. Yareh, to fear, to be afraid. Don't confuse that with ra'ah, to see. Yarad, to go down. You're going to go down to the store in Yarad. Lakak, to take. Mut, to die. Nafal, to fall. That's pretty easy to remember. Nasab, to lift up, bear, carry. Allah, to go up. Avar, to pass, transgress. Ovar. Amad, to stand. Kum, to arise, stand. Kara, call, meet, read aloud. We saw that already in Genesis time. Shuv, to turn or return. Seem, to put, place, set, and po, here.
What was the fall again?
Nafal. Did we make it?